Hello and welcome to the Smart Recovery Podcast, your audio headquarters for inspiring and insightful discussions on the topic of addiction recovery. What you'll hear with us will be self-empowering, science-based, and stigma-free. We believe you have the power within yourself to make changes that will move you toward a more satisfying life. And we hope these messages and interviews with leading addiction experts and advocates will help you believe that too. Remember that the purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care from a doctor or other qualified medical professionals. Before making any changes in your treatment plan, please discuss your thoughts with your medical provider.
Welcome to the Smart Recovery Podcast. I'm Luke Frazier. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk to Charles True. Charles has been abstinent from substances for more than 32 years. He's run SMART meetings around the world for 22 years, and he's worked in the prison system, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about, since 1991. Charles subscribes to some philosophy that is very simple but very effective, and his phrase of the day, most days, is that he helps people build the kind of lives that they don't want to relapse from. Charles True, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Luke.
So listen, it's great to see you and hear you. I know that you've been there and on lockdown like everybody else in the country. How's it been going for you during the coronavirus pandemic?
It's actually been quite interesting. We don't have as many SMART recovery meetings up in the state of Texas as we'd like, but people on their own course have been putting up quite a few local meetings onto these
like the Zoom platform
Zoom,
and such.
Well, Zoom, and also some people are trying Microsoft Teams, and there are also some folks that are using the old GoToMeeting. I ran into a couple of people that were doing GoToMeeting because they were familiar with it.
Well, I think they're probably.
And can I just let me clarify some stuff. So for a lot of years, I spent over 200 days a year outside of the United States. Mm-hmm. So and I've been involved in projects in about 85 countries. So I haven't worked steadily since 91 or nonstop weekly in those times, but I've supported and co-facilitated, and I've been practicing REBT now for the better part of 26 and a half years.
Okay, well, that's certainly is some clarification, but really it comes down to you've been helping a lot of people for a lot of years. How about that?
Only if they say it's help. Right?
Sounds
At the end of the day,
right.
It's most support is by request. If you ask me my opinion, you ask me to talk to me, and you get something out of it, then it's really been support. But if at the end of the day I walk up to you on the street and say, "Hey man, you look down, you look like you need some advice," my granddaddy always told me that was meddling.
Meddling. Okay. All right. That's a good distinction, Charles. So I just wanted to really jump into the story of how you and another gentleman, Ron Lott, who wasn't able to be with us today, but you have been facilitators in the Houston, Texas area, and you decided to try to get permission to run something called an InsideOut program in the Texas prisons. First, tell me what InsideOut is in a nutshell, and then I want to hear how you guys really got it going in the local jails.
Well, InsideOut was a program that was commissioned by one of the original presidents of Smart Recovery, and they got a grant, and they spent about $1 million trying to write a very comprehensive, very instructional, and it's almost a teaching text, the original InsideOut program. They put it into exercises. They put it into a 24-week program, and had fair amounts of luck in Australian prisons, in UK prisons, and then of course, up in Massachusetts, I believe, in Pennsylvania and New York, they had some pretty good results. I have always co-facilitated, whether it was in the Menninger Clinic or any of these other things, with the recovery facilities. I've always tried to do, the big four for smart recovery: the cost benefit analysis, the ABCs, the planning matrix, the smart planning matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily just the things that I know, having done project rescue for a lot of years of my life. A smart guy said, Charles, if you'll bottom line your life, if you'll turn your life into a project, you'll always have a purpose. You can wake up grateful, and you'll listen in the world differently as a project larger than yourself than you ever will as a self-centered guy who says, I don't like what's going on. The way my life turned out sucks.
Yeah, right.
I'm entitled to this, but I can't do it.
Yeah.
So and we see lots of examples of that kind of whiny stuff. And I can be one bigger than just about anyone. But to get back to what we started and the naissance of the book, that's actually up to Ron Lott. He was actually doing a faith-based prison program called Bridges to Life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had also done some stuff with Kairos. Now, my mother, at the age of 83 in West Texas, had a Kairos ministry that she supported for women in West Texas prisons.
Okay.
So I'd heard of that through some of my relatives that are a little more faith-based than I am.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Ron went to Ruth Fowler, who's also one of the 25 and 25, who's been doing a meeting consecutively in Houston, Texas for 25 years.
Wow.
Her and her suite mate, Rob Sarmiento, along with Joe Gerstein, who commissioned the Smart Recovery Program, they actually are the ones that came up with the moniker Smart Recovery.
Okay.
Because most of the practitioners of REBT who were trying to stay sober from alcohol were doing it from Albert Ellis's original book called When AA Doesn't Work for You, Rational Steps to Stopping Alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Loosely paraphrased. Ron asked Ruth who he might use as a co-facilitator. And I guess for a long time I've had a reputation as a rather unorthodox facilitator, and Ron approached me and his where his heart was and what he wanted to try and do was in the right spot. And I'd been heavily involved in China for the few years before, so I had not done a prison meeting when he asked me for about 4.5, 5 years.
Okay. So were you a little rusty, or you just needed to jump in again?
No, I think that if you've ever heard those doors clang behind you, even if it's for a night, or if you understand that everything that they talk about in criminal thinking is also pretty much human thinking. And of course, for a few years in a meeting that I helped start in Moscow back in 1993 and through 1996, our first meetings were in a Russian alcoholic hospital. But Russian alcoholic hospitals in those days were prisons.
Yeah, sounds like the Gulag or something. I mean, you sure it wasn't in Siberia?
Well, we were given, until we moved to the Anglican Church, the Episcopal or the Anglican Church, they gave us a place to meet. It was in Moscow. It was right off of Ho Chi Minh Square, right down the street from the best Vietnamese food restaurant in Moscow, but it was actually an urban prison for alcoholics. And boy, it was, they had injections of all kinds of chemicals and things
Yeah,
like
sounds
that.
like a gulag type situation. That is more at home in Siberia than Moscow. But
Well, it was hard times for Moscow, but the gulag is something completely different. They had a lot of that out in Western Siberia where we used to work
oh
in
boy,
the oil fields.
yeah,
Because I was part of the American society that was, I guess we were pretty much pillaging Russia back then for whatever minerals we could get.
yeah,
And we were also moving nuclear warheads out of the Ukraine and Kazakhstan,
yeah.
helping Bechtel with the contract.
So between China and Australia and London and Russia, I mean, you've been a lot of places doing the kinds of things that help people with substance use disorder, and
Well,
have some hope. But let's get back to
mainly I
Houston.
was lucky to run into other people. And at that time, the thing that we were able to do for others, whether it was the Alano Club in Shanghai, where NA and AA, and I mean any of those other things, somehow or another, there was a core of 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 people, even most of the time outside of me, because I was Project Rescue, and and those guys, in saving their butts. I mean, one guy was audacious enough to go into the Ritz-Carlton in Shanghai, and they gave us this wonderful, the place where they had board meetings. And for the equivalent of $10, they gave us an amazing catered
Nice. That sounds
AA and NA meetings.
that sounds positively lovely. But
so we've been the beneficiary of generosity of people around the world.
well, it's kind of like if you do the right thing, you get the universe smiles upon you. But
right.
let's go back to
and one more thing, the Venn diagram that got me into SMART was meeting a guy who worked with a guy named Warner Earhart over in Moscow, and I was 5 years sober at the time. We were staying in a hotel that was like the first big American JV, and luckily enough for me, I watched the way they did what they did with some people that they were teaching the forum to over there. Now, it didn't really have anything to do with working a program of abstinence, but they had organized themselves extremely well. And I was at the point, every time I went around, and of course, in the oil fields, they all said, "Look, you can't trust a man unless you've been drunk with him twice."
Not just once, twice.
And so I was at the point of going to places, you have pistols pointed at your head, you have all this other stuff, and I just thought, well, shoot, the price of admission of just getting drunk with these guys has got to be easier than worrying about getting my butt blown off.
Man.
And so I was just about to let it go until one of the guys, I guess this guy's name was Dennis, and then I met him and an old friend of mine from Germany and in London going back, and briefly talked with the guy who did the forum. But he told me about this book that he was having trouble reading. It wasn't translated into Russian, but he said that he used it with the Russian 12-step meetings, and he had stopped, and he had found some good ways to talk to people about what he was trying to do to not drink every day. Sorry
Right.
for that long answer.
No, it's a fascinating story, and it just shows that
there's
we,
six programs. There's six programs coming together all at once
mhm,
for one, not necessarily blissful, but one fortunate occurrence.
right.
And
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 that's
and
sometimes how
Ron
it.
and I getting together was almost the same thing.
Okay, so there's you and Ron, and you do get together. He has some prison experience. You have some prison experience. And talk about when you guys decided to, I guess you talked with a pastor who was in the prison system running some volunteer programs, and you offered this idea that we could bring this inside out into the prisons. And were you surprised that the response was green light?
Well, Ron said, these guys in these prisons, they have this stuff. And he described the way some of those normal meetings went. They brought in cookies. They did several things. They had some exercises. And he said, I like what I hear, especially when you come to Ruth's class and you guys are together and we have, 20, 25 people sitting around the room. He said, it's just a completely different way of talking about, ways of being addicted to sex and food and alcohol and drugs and family issues and talking about family and friends. He said, Ruth runs a great meeting week to week, but when the two of you are there together, there's just a great thing. And
Mm-hmm.
Ruth had recommended me to Ron.
Mm-hmm.
So I told Ron, well, there is an Inside Out book,
Mm-hmm.
and the time that I was involved with it, it was extremely heavy. And part of the problem that we had with a lot of the prison populations, and it's funny that the misconception, the most illiterate population in prison, most of the time is white.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If they're able to get into a program, if they're in Latino and Black or whatever, they have to be more erudite. They have to be able to talk their way in. So on a reading and comprehension level,
Mm-hmm.
the guys, a large part of the population has an 8th grade, and now that's not the rule for all people, but just so you'll know, we had a gap between the level that these wonderful programs were written to, which is somebody who is probably sophomore level college,
Mm-hmm.
and the reading capacity of some of these guys, which is between 3rd and 8th grade.
Right. So how could they benefit from that if you can't comprehend, if you can't really take it in? Not only are you struggling with addictions of many kinds, then you're trying to get material internalized that, it might as well be written in a foreign language. So was that something
So Ron
Yeah.
and I would meet 2.5 hours on that Tuesday that we started. And by the way, Chaplain Tom, what's his last name? He was in his last year prior to retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, look, we have 60 faith-based, we have 59 faith-based programs, and I have space for 60. Why not? You guys are just
give it a shot. Yeah.
No. He looked at Ron and he said, "We know, your experience with Bridges,
Mm-hmm.
and this other guy seems to be kind of turned on, and he looks like he ought to be in here rather than
Hey, that's okay. That's all right.
rather than anything."
But there again, there's
so the
happenstance. Yeah, well, there's happenstance, like you talked about, with people showing up and being a part of groups and not being sure that, where these things were going to go. And here's a pastor who's his last year before retirement, who's willing to take a risk. You and Ron somehow end up in front of him, And, talk about once you knew that, you had to go ahead and kind of change this book a little bit in order to reach people.
Well, that's what we do. We'd get together 2.5 hours. And we had a couple other volunteers early on. One of them, Fred, unfortunately passed away. But Ron's sister, Sandy, actually came in, and she takes care of the mindfulness part. Because part of what we do in every jail and prison meeting is that we have a guided meditation that we finish the meeting with. And we've been informed that sending them back to the units after a mindfulness portion of the meeting that we've put in the book, the skills book that we made out of the modified InsideOut, they say that reduces units, and there are times that we'll have 75 to 90 inmates in one of our meetings that we don't give cookies away or Bibles or
you give some mindfulness, peace of mind, and some good information.
But tools, right?
Tools.
So all of a sudden, this one guy said, "Look, I have tools," and of course we print them out, the $20 Successful Life Skills book, and they have to complete all the questions. It's written more like a workbook. So anyway, to go back just a bit, we found out that the original InsideOut program was written like a workbook. It helped. We found that inmates and mental health people and all those other guys, if you bring them a bound book, like the Big Book or something like that, or the Bible, there's a particular way they address it. If there's a book where every lesson has questions that they discuss among them, and they start counseling each other, we find that inside of that, there's like, Henry Ford's mastermind.
That there's the mutual
no matter
support.
what their level is. At the moment that with their own permission, they're talking back to each other about their experience.
There you go.
Well, I know my old lady's got me an 8-ball in the closet.
Yeah.
I talk to her every week. And da-da this and da-da that. And then you get the other guys that say, I can hardly wait to get my business started back.
Yeah. So
we got to where we're doing a lay meeting on Thursday and the prison meeting on Tuesday. We were fortunate enough that until the COVID shut down, we actually had quite a few of the inmates that were at Jester 1 that came and told us on Thursday nights, actually brought their books with them, even some of the prototype books that we had. So then we decided, with talking with Joe Gerstein and, we had Tom Osborne at a prison thing with us in San Diego. And so it's not Tom Osborne. What's Tom's? The guy who used to be.
Oh, is it Horvath? Is that
Tom Horvath? Tom Horvath. Tom Osborne recruited me once to come to Nebraska to teach a business class to a football team.
Of course.
Until he found out I'm just a high school graduate.
Well, listen, you're listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. Today we're talking to Charles True. He and gentleman Ron Lott have worked a lot in prisons, have worked with inmates who have benefited from using workbooks and practical tools and smart recovery principles. Tell us the name of the book, Charles.
It's called Successful Life Skills is the shorthand for it. And I just put that whole box of books. It's called A Course for Successful Life Skills.
Okay. And besides using it as you have so effectively in prison and in facilities like jails, you're also beginning to think about how it can have a larger application, how it can be a part of really everyone's life, whether there's a situation of incarceration or not. So talk about how you are now trying to transition that material, you and Ron, to be a larger kind of offering to the public, to those struggling with addictions.
Okay, so just a little bit more about, Ron will give it to you himself, I'm sure. But Ron and I were both somewhat innovators in several industries. Ron worked in the food industry, and in a family company, they built a very successful distribution company in the, a very, very successful multi-million-dollar company that they then sold upline, and Ron understands industry practices and organizing, and I have had some inventions and some other things, and a couple of my inventions have been very successful in moving large volumes of things around the world. One of my inventions has moved 70 billion tons of wine in bulk and food oil. So we both have experience in organizing large groups of people. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, we donated this book to Smart Recovery and all the proceeds and the copyright, so that if they were able to sell a few 100,000 on Amazon or in the prison systems that have started to ask for it, it would help Smart Recovery's stability the same way in the late 80s and early 90s. Our distribution of the big book and literature and chips, the expensive chips and all that other stuff, NAA and NA, helped assure their financial security. I've been on the literature committee a little while for NA in one of the coastal areas, and was fortunate that one of the first 200 people to get sober, NAA, was my sponsor when I finally did get sober after 9.5 years of trying.
Okay.
So Ron, as we did this and as we watched people take to it, always said, why can't we offer this to the other people? We'd had people in mental health. We had one of the bigger recovery centers on the West Coast and another one here in Texas. They came to me and asked me if I would take something like the prison program they'd heard about and write them a program for their recovery center. And inside of that, the people that kept asking us to try and make it a book for every man got us thinking, well, why not? And we're lucky we have some people at headquarters who've done some work with NAMI and understand a lot of ways to take. And we're not.
Yeah. Excuse me. So that's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And we've had just this last week we had PBS do some coverage on a smart reading meeting, and I've watched it go viral because personally, I've received more than 70 phone calls from around the world. I've received calls from 25 countries who had people forward them a link on it. I've received more calls from overseas than I have here.
You're talking about the PBS story that included Smart Recovery and how we're approaching this subject.
Right.
But that's fascinating. You're looking at adaptation. You're looking at taking something that had an original focus and, as you said, making it available to other kinds of settings, other kinds of people and places, and the everyman, every woman, if you will. So how is that going? I mean, is it going to have the same title that you guys currently use?
Well, we're working with that now. Ron has taken the lead on more or less being the scribe to Because at the end of the day, too many cooks spoil the stew. And Ron and I have been so fortunate to have found a way to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And
collaboration is not always easy, Charles. I mean, sometimes it can be a challenge in itself.
Well, and as you can tell from this podcast, I'm an arrogant, dominating asshole.
Oh, hey now.
And Ron, in his own way, is an upholding, and he's got great help in proliferation. Well, that's what the prisoners identify with.
Sure.
The
Well,
reason
it's
they like
real.
me is the reason they like me as the character is that I look like I should be locked up.
Well, you know what? It's about relationships. It's about ways. It's about being authentic, Charles.
Of course, it's about the background of relatedness, right?
That's right.
At the end of the day, if you can't.
That's right. That's Charles True. Charles True and Ron Lott are working on material that's going to help not just people in institutions or incarcerated individuals, but all of us take a look at how we can live a life, and in the context of recovery, how we can build the kind of lives we don't want to relapse from.
So one of the things is that I think the magic thing here for Ron and I to start working on it from this point of view were that we had requests. Mm-hmm. We had people to say, oh, how about you get with the folks, and how about we make the Smart Recovery Manual easier to look at like this? How about you see if you can do this for the family and friends? Because, CRAFT, which is the family and friends module, is also very unheralded, and families who work who've had their loved ones incarcerated and other things like this. So a lot of the people, I mean, the great thing about the human life is that it's faceted like a diamond. And you can look at any facet and you can say, oh, we can do better. It could be brighter.
Right.
It could be upgraded. And so Ron and I, inside of kind of our own rule with each other, based on request, have looked at playing with
it's the way it's expressed, but that's a great point, Charles. It's organic, that there were people asking for this adaptation, people asking for its ability to help them use it and benefit from it. So it's not as if you were trying to just do it for any old sake. It's because people were asking about it, and that's where, yeah.
And they say, well, and they'll ask certain things, and I guess one of my newer cliches over the last 10 years is that I'd like to see everybody addicted to reality. And we watch the renaming. It's not necessarily politically correct, but people are trying to figure out, the substance use disorder, all of these other things. And I really do appreciate a word that was used less by me, and actually a fellow who worked at the Montrose Center, which is the LGBT center for heritage medications, and we have a smart recovery meeting we're trying to restart there. But he worked very hard in his community, and he kept using maladaptive. Now, I had heard that in REBT, and I didn't really think about it, but I was on a 15-hour flight to Singapore, and all of a sudden maladaptive came across my head. And I butcher a few languages, but maladaptive, adaptivo, badly adapting.
Okay.
And I said, badly adapting to what? And then it occurred to me, the whiny thing is badly adapting to reality.
Reality, right.
So
life as we know it, life on life's terms.
I don't like it. Yeah. Well, you say life on life's terms. And then go back to somebody else and ask them what that is. But the moment you introduce adapting well or adapting badly to the reality in front of you, I've 99.9% of the people that I've been lucky enough to have that conversation come out between us, you can see the light go on.
Well, that's a very direct and forceful way to put it, but it's very direct and easy to understand, which is what can help all of us who are trying to adjust our lives so that they aren't maladaptive, that they are more clear and more purposeful and balanced and, really adding something positive to the world. So we've been talking to Charles True on the Smart Recovery podcast. Charles, any final words about what you and Ron are doing? Any ways to us to get access to the material?
Well, we're operating on the request. We've got a timeline for some of the early idea changing, and Ron's doing his work. I'm doing mine. We're trying to come up with ways to put a light on this, so that if you'll look in the book, almost all of the subjects in the table of contents are where it can be peer-led. You can take the first 15 or 20 minutes and go over the subject. We have feedback in Indiana from jails and other places like that peers like leading the meeting with each other. They like the guideline, and they like coaching each other. So COVID hit us at a point that we wanted to expand like wildfire, and had requests for hundreds of thousands of books and state systems. So at the end of the day, though, I think that the ability to do things over the web, and also to do things on Zoom, will help us get this to more people. But at the end of the day, it's almost like when I fronted a rock band 40-something years ago for a little while. There's nothing like getting out there in front of the audience.
That's right. That's exactly right. I like that. I like the image of you being the front man out there, Charles. But
Charles, I weighed about 100 pounds less.
Oh boy!
I was completely. I used to, when I get real drunk, I'd sing in Cherokee as far as that.
Oh boy. Okay. That's like the Cher song, Cherokee Woman or something like that.
No, it was actual Cherokee. It was a language that only dogs and Indians could understand.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to thank you, Charles True. It's been a fascinating conversation. Best of luck with the material with you and Ron. And when this COVID-19 does settle down, or at least recede a little bit, I'm sure that it'll be picked right back up, and there'll be a lot of exposure for this valuable material. Thank you again. You've been listening.
One thing that you're offering, and I'd just like to acknowledge you guys, because at the end of the day, there's more searching inside of this kind of medium for this kind of discussion. With the pandemic and the people that are trying to pay attention and come up with some kind of rules for us not to spread the infection, right? What we're here doing is looking at, and someone told me that liquor deliveries are through the roof. One lady, they delivered some groceries here from HEB, one of our local supermarkets, and she had just delivered, wine and beer. She said her whole trunk.
Yeah, I've heard that
and
too.
These guys are now taking that kind of delivery in a moderate household 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah,
so
it's tough. Isolation, right?
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is right, this maladaptive behavior is not really born out of isolation as much as it results in isolation once we start creating ourselves as the kind of people that can't communicate, that can't have empathize because either of speed or alcohol or one of those other things that takes us into this human doing that we're becoming rather than the human being that can relate to another human being. But I want to acknowledge you for the work you're doing and cut away about 2/3 of what we've got on this. And you might
it's been great stuff. All right, we'll leave it right there, Charles True. And you have been listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. If you'd like more information about Smart Recovery, you can visit us at smartrecovery.org. Visit us on our YouTube channel or other social media. We have a nice Facebook presence, and also there are plenty of ways to hear more podcasts by going to the web at smartrecovery.org. This is Luke Frazier. Until next time, stay healthy and stay connected.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. If you found today's episode helpful and inspiring, we encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear its messages. If you or someone you know needs addiction-related help, we encourage you to visit smartrecovery.org to find a wealth of digital resources, practical tools, and social supports meant to help you and your loved ones on their recovery journey. While there, you can search for a local Smart meeting near you, or join our online community to find 24/7 access to recovery help through regular online meetings and helpful message boards and forums. All of our meetings and online community resources are completely free of charge. Be sure to connect with us online to get more helpful addiction-related resources. Visit our website at smartrecovery.org, where you can search for local meetings, join our online community, subscribe to our e-newsletter, and find regular blogs, videos, podcasts, and more. You can also help us to spread our self-empowering, science-based messages to more people who need to hear from them in important ways. First, get trained on the Smart Recovery Program. If you are a licensed healthcare provider and could benefit from using Smart Recovery in your professional work, or if you are someone who would like to volunteer and lead Smart Recovery meetings in your community, please check out our training and volunteer opportunities at www.smartrecovery.org/training. Second, donate to support our work. Smart Recovery is a nonprofit that runs on the donations from generous supporters who understand the need for recovery-related support. If you would like to help us reach more people, consider donating to Smart Recovery at smartrecovery.org/donate. We'd like to thank US World Meds for their generous support of this episode. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Smart Recovery Podcast.